Well, the world is now finally aware of the Ebola crisis taking place in Africa. All it really took was for the Ebola virus to finally make its way to the first world. But before I go into any of that, let's first understand what the Ebola virus is. Ebola virus disease, EVD, or Ebola hemorrhagic fever, or EHF, or simply Ebola, is a disease of humans and other primates caused by an Ebola virus. Symptoms start 2 days or 3 weeks after contracting the virus, with a fever, sore throat, muscle pain, and headaches. Typically, vomiting, diarrhea, and rash follow, along with diseased function of the liver and kidneys. Around this time, affected people may begin to bleed both within the body and externally. This virus may be acquired upon contact with blood or other bodily fluids of an infected human or other animal. Spreading through the air has not been documented in the natural environment. Fruit bats are believed to be carriers and may spread the virus without being infected. Once human infection occurs, the disease may spread between people as well. Male survivors may be able to transmit the disease via semen for nearly 2 months. To diagnose EVD, other diseases with similar symptoms such as malaria, cholera, and other viral hemorrhagic fevers are first excluded. Blood samples are tested for viral antibodies, viral RNA, or the virus itself to confirm the diagnosis. No specific treatment for the disease is yet available. Efforts to help those who are infected are supportive and include giving either oral rehydration therapy, slightly sweet and salty water to drink, or intravenous fluids. This supportive care improves outcomes. The disease has a high risk of death, killing between 25 and 90%. Those infected with the virus is an average 50%. The global class nature of this crisis was made evident to us from the very beginning. The media really didn't start paying attention to it until a first worlder got it. I mean, people don't realize that about 4,000 people have died as a result of the Ebola virus. The problem is that those people died in Africa. It was not until an American or a Westerner had actually contracted the disease that the world started to pay attention, or more specifically, the media began paying attention. Thomas E. Duncan, the Dallas patient who became America's only travel-related case of Ebola. Duncan is black, and he still got the media coverage. So from this, I see very little in the way of race. Of course, race is an issue, just as it always is. It's just not as big in the overall situation that we're seeing right now. The world only really started paying attention to the Ebola epidemic when it involved patients in the US. We can see 2 spikes here in the Google Trends graphic. The first is in August, when the Ebola-stricken missionaries Ken Brantley and Nancy Wright Bull were taken to Atlanta. The second is in October, when Thomas E. Duncan arrived in Dallas. The same thing happened on Twitter. According to social media analytics service Topsy, attention to Ebola only peaked when news broke that the virus had come to the US. I know many people would be quick to point out that the media only started carrying it when someone from the US got infected because, well, the media is geared toward first world people and they're not going to give them something that they don't really want to see, or something that they won't want to look at, because the media, like everything else, is a capitalist enterprise. It is about what will be seen. What does the customer, the viewer, want? And that translates into revenue dollars via advertising. So it's not entirely just a case of, the media didn't cover it because it wasn't relevant to the people who would end up not watching it. That's the very point I'm trying to make. The people who have died, the mass amount of people who've died of this outbreak, are all in Africa. And that's the point. They don't care. The people in the first world don't care that it's only been people in Africa who have died. And that's why it won't sell. Capitalism, in this case, is just facilitating the prejudice that is already there. That class divide between the first and the third world is already there. Why? Because we hear about people dying in the third world all the time. This is expected. When somebody dies over there because of something, It's just a statistic. It's just a number on a screen that's quoted to us. It's not something real, like someone dying here in the first world, someone in the same state, someone in the same province. That would be the difference. And that would be why the world didn't start to care until it happened to somebody in the first world. In the Western media, there are first world diseases and third world diseases. And the attention devoted to the latter depends on the threat they pose to us, not on a universal measure of human suffering. This is true. Now, the racial aspect to Ebola was made apparent right away. When the two white Christian missionaries were brought to the United States after they contracted the virus, the media wasn't really in a huge uproar. It was like, there's a serious thing going on and we have to help these people. These are Americans and we have to do what we can. They're victims. But when Duncan, a black American, was brought into the country when he was suffering from Ebola, now it's a viral outbreak. This guy is a plague carrier. You know, this guy, we have to get him out of here. And now there's all this hyperbole and fear-mongering that, you know, now Ebola is here. But that fear-mongering only happened when a black man was brought into the United States, when a black first worlder got the disease. So it is not simply a measure of first versus third world. There is very clearly a racial context to all this. I mean, one merely has to look at the coverage of Fox News that they've been broadcasting. They keep saying things like, those people over there don't believe in medical science, which is, of course, some kind of shot at, you know, witch doctors or traditional medicine or something, which is really not the case there, because it's kind of hard to seek medical attention when there's absolutely no way of getting it, because, well, you have absolutely no infrastructure, education, or money. And this shows a little bit more of the tremendous amount of racist ignorance that comes out of news outlets like Fox News. Let's face it, this would be a much bigger deal if this were happening in the first world. The Toronto Star ran an article by Helen Branswell of the Canadian Press that made this very point. Imagine if you take a region of Canada, America, or Europe, and you had 450 people dying of a viral hemorrhagic fever. It would just be unacceptable. And it's unacceptable in West Africa. So why is this happening? Because of a global class divide. Because the people in Africa don't matter. Because they don't have any money. And we as first worlders benefit from that same oppression that's carried out against them. Take this as an example. Few people remember that in 2009, a researcher in Germany ended up contracting the Ebola virus. What happened? Canada got an experimental treatment for it to him as fast as humanly possible, right away, without question. Yet, in the meantime, the media is turning around and saying things like, this isn't the time to be testing Ebola medication. If there isn't a time to test a medicine, you know, this would be the time. There's a tremendous amount of suffering going on, and there is no known treatment for it. Frankly, I'd rather take an experimental treatment than no treatment at all. The reality is, pharmaceutical companies don't want to give it to them. The reason the guy in Germany got it was because, hell, he could afford it, if not the government actually paying for it. But these people in Africa are poor. They have no money whatsoever. Their suffering doesn't matter because a profit cannot be made. Pharmaceutical companies are well aware that they will make more money developing a treatment than they will any preventative measure to keep it from happening. I mean, this is the logic of the profit motive. You will do exactly what it is that will make you the most amount of money. Any human suffering that occurs as a result is merely a byproduct of an amoral system, as Cenk Uygur put it. And this shows, once again, that capitalism is the antithesis, the antithesis of human life. Anthony Fauci, the head of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, has been telling everyone in the press who will listen to him in the last 2 weeks that an Ebola vaccine would be close if it weren't for the corporate profit motive. We have been working on our own Ebola vaccine, but we could never get any buy-in from the companies. We have a candidate. We put it in monkeys and it looks good, but the incentive on the part of the pharmaceutical companies to develop a vaccine that treats little outbreaks every 30 or 40 years, well, that's not much incentive. John Ashton, the president of the UK Faculty of Public Health, wrote a piece in The Independent decrying capitalism's unwillingness to help those suffering. The scandal of the unwillingness of the pharmaceutical industry to invest in research to produce treatments and vaccines, something they refuse to do because the numbers involved are, in their terms, so small they don't justify the investment. This is the moral bankruptcy of capitalism acting in the absence of an ethical and social framework. It is literally the profit motive that is keeping the vaccine for the Ebola virus from being produced. And it's the market that is what's keeping Africans from getting a hold of it, because they have no money. Resources, social power will flow in the direction of money, because money is the physical representation of social value that's created through labor. So it can only go where money goes because of the production of everything for its exchange value, not its use value. It's a vaccine. This really should be, more than anything else, recognized as a need more than something that should be used exclusively for change. Jim Young Kim, the head of the World Bank, says that the cost to the world, like the economic cost to Africa that will arise as a result of this, could be as high as $33 billion. That's the amount of economic damage that the third world is looking at, particularly these countries in Africa. So there is a real definite economic cost here, one that nobody is willing to help out with. But yet these countries are the ones in the most desperate economic situations, who have the least ability to be able to do something because of the imperialism that is carried out against these countries, which, by the way, China is not immune from. Even China extracts large amounts of value from the third world, particularly Africa, where they have been recently moving in. It is because of our theft from them and from their land that they really can't do anything, and why we owe them a huge debt, and why, yeah, it should come out of our pockets, particularly the United States, to pay for the damage that's been done, if not outright pay for the vaccine. This is a tremendous amount of human suffering that isn't being taken care of because of us extracting value from them, and we owe them a huge debt, if not right admitting that this isn't being taken care of because of our greed and selfishness. Even though The Onion is a satirical news source, sometimes in their satire they speak more truth than the media does. They had a recent article where they said a cure for the Ebola virus is 50 white victims away. I mean, the statement is pretty clear. Nobody cares because they're black and third world people. But there's a reason for why this is. Because of the wealth the first world has. And that's absolutely true. If there was a mass outbreak of Ebola in the first world, you know exactly how fast that would be taken care of. The United States would not spare a single expense in stopping that disease from spreading. And you know why? Because they can. Because they can afford it. And the suffering of first world people would undermine their economic base. The people who vote for them, the people whose dollars they collect for their profits. And that's an absolute truth. We only have to look so far as the difference in the contributions to the Ebola struggle made by the United States and made by Cuba. Look at Cuba. They sent like tons of doctors and supplies to go down there and treat and help the people who are suffering to the best of their ability. Cuba just basically handed over a ton of doctors, medical resources to try to alleviate the suffering of people. Yet what did the United States send? They sent 3,000 soldiers. They said to fight Ebola. Like, is Ebola something you can shoot? No. The point is to provide the forces necessary to contain the Ebola ghettos that have popped up as a result. Entire villages, small towns that are stricken with Ebola that they need to keep contained. But look at the difference there. In the third world solidarity of those who feel the same kind of third world situation. The heart and soul of the Cuban people was to help those who were suffering. The idea that comes from the third world is to help. The idea that came from the first world was to contain. That is what the United States, the first world, really wants. They want to contain. They're not concerned with helping people, because then they would have sent, they could send unbelievable amounts of money to get everything running, to get a vaccine put out, to pay for tremendous amounts of treatment for these people. But that's not what they want. They want to contain, not help. And that would be the difference between the mentality of the first world and the mentality of the third world. Cuba has always been a big supporter of helping those who are less fortunate. They have tremendous amounts of doctors going all over the world all the time, living with the people, living their daily lives, finding out what it is that affects them by having the same experience that they have. And they stay 6 months, as opposed to Doctors Without Borders, which usually stay 1 or 2 months. And they get very nice, relatively comfortable accommodations. They don't have to, actually live with the people that they're trying to help. And they get paid more than regular doctors do had they just stayed home and done a private practice. And that speaks even more about the mentality of the first world and the third world. They don't really care. For them, it's a job, something to put on their resume. Human suffering is something that they feel they can use for their own benefit. Whereas it's the doctors of the third world, where the profit motive in medicine is eliminated, that you end up with people who entirely care about ending human suffering. And that right there speaks everything that needs to be said about the difference between the first world and the third world. The oppressed understand what it means to be oppressed and want to alleviate that suffering. The people of the first world, they only see that as an opportunity. More importantly, an opportunity to make money. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. While you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.